The following Monday, Daniel returned to work. He arrived early, before the zoo opened to the public, trying to avoid the cameras that still lingered near the entrance. Even a week after the incident, the story hadn't died down. If anything, it had grown larger. Walking through the staff entrance felt strange. His colleagues greeted him warmly, some hugging him, others patting his back. But there was also an awkwardness in the air. They all knew what had happened, had all seen the videos, had all read the investigations and the debates online. "Good to have you back," Rodriguez said, meeting him near the locker rooms. "Fair warning, though. The media's still everywhere, and visitors are going to recognize you. Management's put together some guidelines for how to handle it." Daniel nodded. He'd expected this. His face had been on national television for a week straight. People would know who he was. But first, before anything else, he needed to see Kofi. He made his way to the gorilla exhibit, his heart pounding. What if Kofi had been affected by the incident? What if their relationship had been damaged? Animals remembered trauma. They associated people with experiences. What if Kofi now associated Daniel with that chaotic, frightening day? The gorillas were in their outdoor enclosure. Daniel stood at the keeper viewing area, watching them through the reinforced glass. Kofi was sitting near the climbing structure, grooming one of the younger females. The troop looked peaceful, relaxed, like nothing had happened. Then Kofi looked up. His eyes met Daniel's through the glass. For a moment, neither moved. Daniel held his breath, waiting to see how Kofi would react. Would he recognize him? Would he remember? Kofi stood up and walked toward the glass. He sat down directly in front of Daniel, separated only by the thick barrier. Then he did something he'd done hundreds of times over their 12 years together. He pressed his hand against the glass. Daniel felt tears running down his face. He pressed his own hand against the glass, matching Kofi's gesture. It was their greeting, their way of connecting. And Kofi still remembered. "Hey, buddy," Daniel whispered. "I missed you." Kofi made a soft rumbling sound, the gorilla equivalent of a greeting. There was no fear in his eyes, no aggression, no trauma, just recognition and what Daniel could only describe as affection. "I'm sorry about that day," Daniel continued. "I know it was scary and confusing, but thank you for trusting me." He stayed there for 20 minutes just sitting with Kofi, re-establishing their connection. The other gorillas came over too, curious about what was happening. Zuri pressed her face close to the glass, examining Daniel with those intelligent eyes. Even Biko, the young male who'd tried to display that day, came over peacefully. Later that morning, the zoo opened to the public. Within an hour, Daniel knew that coming back to work was going to be more complicated than he'd anticipated. "Are you the guy? The one who saved the kid?" A teenager asked, phone already recording. "Can we take a selfie with you?" A group of women requested. "You're a hero, man. What you did was incredible," a father said, shaking Daniel's hand while his kids stared in awe. It was overwhelming. Daniel tried to be polite, tried to smile and acknowledge people, but he wasn't used to this kind of attention. He was a zookeeper, not a celebrity. He just wanted to do his job and take care of the animals. Director Hayes found him during lunch break. "How's it going?" "Strange," Daniel admitted. "I didn't expect people to recognize me so much. The board has been discussing this. Your story has brought unprecedented attention to the zoo. Attendance is up 40%. Donations are flooding in. People want to see where it happened, want to see Kofi, want to meet you." Daniel wasn't sure if that was good news or bad news. "There's something else," Hayes continued. "We've been contacted by several organizations. They want you to speak about animal behavior, about safety protocols, about the incident. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums wants you to help develop new emergency response training. I'm not a speaker. I'm a keeper. You're someone who experienced an extraordinary situation and made decisions based on deep knowledge of animal behavior. That experience is valuable. Think about it." Over the next few weeks, Daniel slowly adjusted to his new reality. The media attention gradually decreased, though it never fully went away. He gave a few carefully selected interviews, always emphasizing the importance of zoo safety and proper barriers, rather than focusing on his own actions. Tyler, the boy he'd saved, made a full recovery. His mother, Claire, brought him to the zoo 6 weeks after the incident. It was an emotional meeting, carefully coordinated by the zoo's PR team and security. Tyler was shy at first, hiding behind his mother's legs. But when he saw the gorillas, his face lit up with joy. "Mama, look. The gorillas!" he squealed, pressing his hands against the new, properly secured barrier. Claire held Daniel's hand as they watched Tyler. He doesn't remember falling. The doctors say the memory's just gone, which is probably a blessing. He still loves animals, still loves the zoo. No fear at all. That's good, Daniel said. I'm glad he can still enjoy this. We owe you everything, Claire said quietly. I know you don't want to be called a hero, but that's what you are to us. You gave me my son back, Tyler turned around. Are you the man who takes care of the gorillas? I am, Daniel answered, kneeling down to be at eye level with the boy. The big one is pretty. What's his name? That's Kofi. He's the leader of the family. Did he try to hurt you when you came to get me? Tyler asked with the innocent directness that only children have. Daniel thought about how to answer. Nobody. Kofi was confused because I was in his space, but he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He's actually pretty gentle. I wish I could remember seeing him up close, Tyler said wistfully. Maybe it's better you don't remember that part, Daniel said gently. You can just remember the fun parts. That's okay. The incident led to significant changes throughout the zoo industry. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums launched a nationwide review of barrier safety. Dozens of zoos discovered similar gaps in their exhibits and made immediate corrections. New standards were developed, with input from Daniel and other experienced keepers. Daniel found himself becoming an unexpected advocate for better zoo design and emergency protocols. He traveled to conferences, speaking to other animal care professionals about the importance of understanding animal behavior in crisis situations. The thing people don't realize, he told an audience at one such conference, is that animals aren't mindless or predictable. They're individuals with their own personalities and relationships. Kofi didn't stay calm that day because gorillas are safe. He stayed calm because we had a relationship built over 12 years. That relationship saved lives. The video of the incident became a teaching tool, analyzed in university classrooms studying animal behavior, emergency response, and ethical decision-making. Experts wrote papers about Kofi's behavior, about the bond between humans and animals, about the split-second decisions we make in crisis. 3 months after the incident, Daniel was feeding Kofi through the keeper window, a routine they'd done thousands of times. Kofi took the apple from Daniel's hand gently, their usual interaction. You know, Daniel said, people keep asking me if I'd do it again, if I had to make that choice over again, knowing everything that happened after. Kofi chewed his apple, watching Daniel with those expressive eyes. The honest answer is, I hope I never have to make that choice again. But yeah, I'd do exactly the same thing. Because some decisions aren't really decisions at all. They're just who you are. A young keeper was shadowing Daniel that day, learning the routines. How do you build that kind of relationship with an animal like Kofi? She asked. Daniel thought about it. Time mostly, consistency, respect. You show up every day, you pay attention, you learn their language, and you never forget they're wild animals who've chosen to tolerate you in their space. It's a privilege, not a right. The young keeper nodded, taking notes. And if you're ever in a situation where protocol says one thing but your instinct says another, she asked hesitantly. Daniel was quiet for a moment. That's the hardest question. The rules exist for good reasons. They keep us safe, keep the animals safe. But there are moments, rare moments, where you have to trust your judgment based on years of experience. Just know that if you break protocol, you better be right, and you better be prepared for the consequences. By the end of the year, Daniel had settled back into routine. The zoo was different now, with better barriers and improved emergency systems. The staff had gone through extensive training on crisis response. Daniel had been promoted to senior animal behavior specialist, a new position created partly because of the incident. He still worked with Kofi every day. Their relationship remained strong, perhaps even deeper than before. Sometimes Daniel wondered what Kofi remembered about that day, if anything. Did the silverback understand what had happened? Did he know that his choice to stay calm had saved lives? On the anniversary of the incident, Tyler and his family came to the zoo again. Tyler was 4 now, thriving and happy, still fascinated by animals. Daniel watched him press his face against the glass, giggling at the gorilla's antics. Claire stood beside Daniel, both of them watching the boy who'd brought them together in the most dramatic way possible. He wants to be a zookeeper when he grows up, Claire said with a smile. He talks about it constantly, says he wants to take care of animals like you do. He'd be good at it, Daniel said. He's clearly passionate. Thank you, Claire said. It was something she said every time they met, and Daniel suspected she'd keep saying it for the rest of their lives. Thank you for being brave when it mattered. Daniel watched Kofi playing with the younger gorillas, watched the troop interact in their carefully maintained habitat, watched Tyler's eyes light up with joy and wonder. I wasn't brave, Daniel said quietly. I was terrified. But sometimes being terrified and doing it anyway is the only option we have. That evening, after the zoo closed and the crowds dispersed, Daniel stood alone at the gorilla exhibit. The troop was settling in for the night. The staff had finished their rounds and everything was quiet. Kofi sat near the glass, just sitting. Not eating, not playing, just existing in that moment. Daniel sat down across from him, separated by the barrier that was now properly secured, properly safe. Life's strange, isn't it, buddy? Daniel said softly. One moment changes everything. One decision ripples out in ways you never expect. Kofi made a soft sound, acknowledging Daniel's presence. I learned something that day, Daniel continued. I learned that following the rules is important, but so is following your heart. I learned that trust takes years to build but only seconds to prove. And I learned that you, my friend, are more remarkable than most people will ever understand. Kofi pressed his hand against the glass. Daniel matched the gesture, their old ritual, their connection transcending species and circumstances. Same time tomorrow? Daniel asked. Kofi settled into his sleeping area, surrounded by his family. The troop was safe, healthy, and thriving. A little boy was alive and dreaming of becoming a zookeeper someday. The zoo had better safety protocols. And Daniel had learned that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most important changes. As he walked out of the zoo that night, Daniel didn't think about the fame or the controversy or the investigation. He thought about the fact that tomorrow he'd come back and do it all again. Feed the animals, maintain the habitats, teach the new keepers, and hopefully never face another situation like that Saturday afternoon. But if he did, he knew exactly what he'd do. Because that's who he was. A zookeeper who understood that caring for animals meant more than just feeding them and cleaning their spaces. It meant building relationships, earning trust, and sometimes making split-second decisions that changed everything. The crowd might never fully understand what happened that day. The debates would continue about whether he was a hero or reckless, whether he should have been fired or awarded. But none of that really mattered. What mattered was that a 3-year-old boy was alive. What mattered was that a 400-pound silverback had chosen trust over aggression. What mattered was that their story had led to real change that would protect other children and other animals. And in the end, that was enough. 3 days after the incident, Daniel still hadn't left his house. The media was camped outside, news vans lining his street like some kind of bizarre parade. Every major network wanted an interview. Morning shows, evening news, documentary producers, even a few movie studios had reached out through the zoo's public relations team. He'd ignored all of them. His phone buzzed constantly. Social media had exploded in ways he couldn't have imagined. The video of him in the enclosure with Kofi had been viewed over 50 million times. People had created hashtags. Some supported him. Others wanted him prosecuted. The debates raged across every platform. You need to eat something, his wife said, setting a plate of food in front of him. Daniel stared at it without appetite. He'd barely eaten since Saturday. The investigation team had interviewed him twice, recording every detail of what happened. They'd been professional but cold, treating him like a suspect rather than someone who'd saved a child's life. The zoo called. His wife continued. They want you to come in tomorrow for another meeting. What kind of meeting? They didn't say. Just that Director Hayes needs to speak with you. Daniel's stomach churned. This was it. They were going to fire him. 12 years of service gone. And honestly, part of him understood why. He had broken the rules. He had endangered himself and potentially the animals. No matter how good his intentions were, he'd violated fundamental protocols that existed for very good reasons. His daughter came into the kitchen, home from school. She was 7 years old and didn't fully understand what was happening. She knew her dad had saved a little boy at the zoo, knew he was on the news but didn't grasp the controversy surrounding it. Dad, kids at school keep asking about you. They think you're famous, she said, climbing onto the chair next to him. I'm not famous, sweetheart. I just did what anyone would have done. That's not what everyone's saying. Mrs. Peterson showed us the video in class. She said you were very brave, but also that we should always follow rules. Daniel smiled despite himself. That sounded like exactly what a teacher would say. Brave but rule-breaking. Hero but irresponsible. The two narratives were at war with each other, and nobody seemed to know which one was true. That evening, Daniel finally watched the full video that had gone viral. He'd avoided it until now, but he needed to see what everyone else was seeing, what the investigation team was examining frame by frame. Watching it was surreal. He saw himself jump into the enclosure, saw the determination on his face as he ran to the child. He saw the moment Kofi emerged from the indoor area, saw the silverback's body language change from curiosity to alert awareness. He saw himself pick up the boy, saw his hands shaking even though he'd tried so hard to appear calm. But what struck him most was Kofi's behavior. Daniel had been so focused on the child and his own fear that he hadn't fully processed what Kofi was doing. Watching it now, he could see it clearly. Kofi had recognized him. The silverback's posture wasn't aggressive. It was cautious, confused, but not threatening. When the younger male, Biko, had tried to display, Kofi had shut it down immediately. The silverback had protected Daniel in a way. Or at least he'd maintained calm when things could have gone very wrong. The video comments were still pouring in. Daniel read through them, seeing every possible opinion represented. This man is a hero. He risked everything for a child he didn't know. He should be charged with child endangerment. Moving an injured child can cause more harm. The zoo should fire him for violating safety protocols. The zoo should give him a medal for saving that boy's life. What about the gorilla? What if they'd had to kill it? That gorilla showed more restraint than most humans would. The parents should be investigated. How did they let their child fall in? The zoo's barrier system is inadequate. This is their fault. Everyone had someone to blame. The parents, the zoo, Daniel, the barrier manufacturers, society for not respecting wild animals enough. The only one nobody blamed was the child, which was appropriate. He was 3 years old. He didn't know better. Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number, but he answered it anyway. Is this Daniel? The zookeeper, a woman's voice, nervous and emotional. Yes, this is Daniel. This is Claire. My son Tyler is the boy you saved. She paused, and Daniel could hear her trying not to cry. I needed to call you. The zoo won't let me visit, and I don't know where you live, but I needed you to hear my voice and know how grateful I am. Daniel's throat tightened. How is Tyler doing? He woke up yesterday. He has a concussion and his arm is in a cast, but the doctors say he's going to be fine, all because of you. Now she was definitely crying. I turned away for 2 seconds. 2 seconds to help my daughter tie her shoe, and he was through that gap. I didn't even know there was a gap. I thought the barriers were safe. It wasn't your fault, Daniel said firmly. You're a good mother. This was a system failure, not a parenting failure. Everyone's saying I'm a terrible parent. The comments online are horrible. They're saying I should lose custody, that I'm neglectful, that I don't deserve my children. Her voice broke. But you don't know me, and you risked your life anyway. Why? Daniel thought about the question. Why had he done it? In that moment, he hadn't thought about heroism or consequences or rules. He'd just thought about a child who needed help. Because that's what people should do, he said simply. Help each other when we can. The zoo is investigating the barriers now, Claire said. They found 6 different spots around the gorilla exhibit, where the gaps were wide enough for small children to slip through. 6 places where this could have happened. If you hadn't been there, if the timing had been different. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Is Tyler asking about what happened? Daniel asked. He doesn't remember falling. The last thing he remembers is looking at the gorillas through the glass. The doctors say that's normal with concussions. Maybe it's better that way. He doesn't have to remember being scared. They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. Daniel felt some of the weight lift from his shoulders. Tyler was going to be okay. That's what mattered most. The next day, Daniel drove to the zoo for his meeting with Director Hayes. The media followed his car, helicopters tracking him from above. It would have been funny if it wasn't so invasive. The zoo had arranged for him to enter through the service entrance away from the public. As he walked through the familiar corridors, he realized how much he missed this place. The sounds, the smells, even the routine announcements over the PA system. This had been his second home for 12 years. Director Hayes' office felt different today. There were other people there, 2 members of the board of directors, the head of animal care, the chief veterinarian, and Rodriguez from security. This was serious. "Thank you for coming, Daniel," Hayes said, her tone neutral. "We've completed our preliminary investigation. I wanted to share our findings with you directly." Daniel sat down, his heart pounding. First, the barrier issue. Engineering has confirmed that there were multiple gaps in the viewing barrier that were wide enough for small children to slip through. This was a critical safety failure that we take full responsibility for. All barriers are being replaced or modified immediately. That was good news, at least. Other children wouldn't be at risk. Second, we reviewed all footage from multiple angles, and we consulted with 3 independent animal behavior experts. Their unanimous conclusion was that the gorilla, Kofi, displayed non-aggressive behavior throughout the incident. He recognized you, responded to your body language, and actively prevented escalation from younger members of the troop. One of the board members, an older man Daniel didn't know well, spoke up. The expert said this was one of the most remarkable displays of human-animal relationship they'd ever witnessed. Kofi's behavior suggests a level of trust and recognition that's frankly extraordinary. Daniel felt his eyes sting with tears. Kofi was okay. They weren't going to punish him or remove him from the exhibit. However, Hayes continued, and Daniel's brief relief evaporated. You still violated multiple safety protocols. You entered an enclosure without authorization. You moved an injured child without medical training. You put yourself and potentially the animal at risk. These violations cannot be overlooked regardless of the outcome. Here it comes, Daniel thought. This is where they fire me. The board has spent the last 3 days debating what action to take, Hayes said. We've received over 10,000 emails, calls, and letters, some demanding you be fired, others demanding you be commended. We've heard from animal rights groups, child safety advocates, zoo professionals across the country, and even some international organizations. What did you decide? Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Hayes looked at him for a long moment. We've decided on a formal written reprimand that will remain in your permanent file. You'll be required to complete additional safety training and attend monthly meetings with the animal behavior team. You'll return to work on Monday. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. I'm not being fired? No, you're not being fired, but I broke the rules. I could have gotten killed. I could have gotten Kofi killed. Yes, you could have, Hayes agreed. And if you ever do anything like that again, you will be fired immediately. But the board, myself included, had to consider the totality of the situation. A child's life was saved because of your intimate knowledge of Kofi's behavior and your willingness to act when action was needed. That counts for something. Daniel lay on the concrete pathway, his chest heaving, unable to process what had just happened. Around him, everything was chaos. Paramedics rushed past with a stretcher for the boy. Security guards were shouting into radios. The crowd pressed forward, some trying to take photos, others offering help, most just standing there in shock. Someone helped Daniel sit up. His vision swam for a moment and he realized his hands were covered in blood, the boy's blood from the head wound. His own blood too, he noticed. His palm was torn where the rope had burned through his glove. You okay? Can you stand? It was Rodriguez, the head of security, his face pale and serious. Yeah, I think so, Daniel managed, though his legs felt like jelly. He looked back at the enclosure. Through the glass barrier, he could see Kofi still sitting in the same spot. The silverback was watching the commotion with what looked like concern. Zuri had moved closer to the indoor entrance, nervous about all the noise and activity. The other gorillas had gathered around Kofi, looking to their leader for reassurance. Is the boy? Daniel started to ask. They're working on him now. You got him out in time, Rodriguez said, helping Daniel to his feet. But we need to move. Clear the area. The crowd was still massive, phones pointing in every direction. Daniel could see at least 50 people recording everything. This was going to be everywhere within the hour. Social media would explode. The news would pick it up. His face would be on every screen in the country. The thought made him feel sick. I need to sit down, Daniel said, not here. Come on, staff area. Now. Rodriguez guided him away from the crowd, through a keeper entrance that required a key card. Once inside, away from the public, Daniel finally let himself collapse onto a bench. His whole body was shaking now. The adrenaline that had kept him going was wearing off, leaving him feeling hollow and terrified. He'd just done something incredibly stupid. He'd violated every safety protocol. He could have died. The child could have died. Kofi could have been hurt if things had gone wrong and they'd needed to use tranquilizers or worse. What was I thinking? Daniel whispered, putting his face in his hands. You were thinking about saving a kid's life, Rodriguez said quietly. But yeah, you're in serious trouble. Daniel looked up. How bad? Bad. Director's already on her way. She was at a conference in the city, but she'll be here in 20 minutes, and she's not happy. I've already been ordered to put you on immediate suspension. Suspension? Daniel felt his stomach drop. He'd worked at this zoo for 12 years. He'd never been written up, never had a single complaint. He loved this job. These animals were his life. You went into an enclosure with a 400-pound gorilla, Daniel. Without authorization. Without backup. You could have been killed. We could have lost Kofi if he'd attacked and we'd had to intervene. This is serious. Daniel knew Rodriguez was right. He knew all of this. But in that moment when he'd seen that little boy lying motionless in the moat, none of those rules had mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting that child to safety. I'd do it again, Daniel said quietly. Rodriguez sighed. I know you would. That's what makes this complicated. A paramedic poked her head into the room. You the one who went in there? We need to check you out. You might have injuries you don't realize yet. Daniel let her examine his hand, which she cleaned and bandaged. She checked his pupils, asked him questions to make sure he hadn't hit his head during the rescue. He hadn't, though his knees were bruised from the hard landing when he'd jumped into the enclosure. You're lucky, the paramedic said. Could have been a lot worse, lucky. Yeah, he supposed he was lucky. But he didn't feel lucky. He felt exhausted and scared and like his whole life was about to fall apart. Outside the staff area, Daniel could hear the crowd. They hadn't dispersed. If anything, it sounded like more people had arrived. News must have spread through the zoo. Everyone wanted to see where it happened. Rodriguez's radio crackled. Rodriguez, we've got a situation. The mother is demanding to speak to the keeper who rescued her son, and the media is already at the front gates. 6 news vans so far. Copy that, Rodriguez replied. He looked at Daniel. The mother wants to thank you. I don't need thanks. I just want to know if the boy is okay. He's alive. Paramedics said he has a concussion, broken arm, and some lacerations. But he's stable. They're transporting him to Children's Hospital now. Daniel felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Stable. The boy was stable. That was what mattered. Everything else he could deal with. But then the door burst open and the zoo director walked in. Director Patricia Hayes was 55, had run the zoo for 8 years, and did not tolerate nonsense. She was respected by the staff but also feared. Her first priority was always the animals, then the zoo's reputation, then the staff. In that order, she looked at Daniel with an expression that could freeze lava. My office. Now, she said. Daniel followed her through the staff corridors to the administrative building. Hayes didn't speak, which somehow made it worse. The silence felt heavy with disappointment and anger. Her office was neat and professional, walls covered with photos of animals and conservation certificates. She sat behind her desk and gestured for Daniel to sit opposite her. 12 years, she said finally. 12 years of exemplary service. Never a single incident. And today you decide to throw all of that away. Director Hayes, I'm not finished. Her voice was sharp. Do you have any idea what you've done? You violated every safety protocol we have. You put yourself at risk. You put that child at further risk by moving him when he had injuries. You put Kofi at risk because if he had attacked, we would have been forced to intervene. Possibly with lethal force to save your life. Daniel felt each word like a physical blow. She was right about all of it. The zoo's insurance is going to have a field day with this, Hayes continued. We could lose our accreditation. We could face lawsuits, and the media circus that's about to descend on us will impact every aspect of our operations. The barrier had a flaw, Daniel said quietly. That's how the boy got in. There was a gap. I know about the barrier. Engineering is already examining it. That's a separate issue that will be addressed. Right now, we're talking about your decision to enter an enclosure with dangerous animals. Kofi's not dangerous. Every wild animal is potentially dangerous, Hayes interrupted. You of all people should know that. Just because you've worked with Kofi for 12 years doesn't mean he's safe. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and this could have ended very differently. Daniel knew she was right. He did know better. The thing about working with animals for a long time is that you start to forget they're wild. You build relationships, you read their body language, you think you understand them, but understanding is not the same as control. Kofi could have killed him easily if he'd wanted to. "I'm suspending you effective immediately," Hayes said, "pending a full investigation. You'll be paid during the suspension, but you are not to come onto zoo property or have any contact with the animals." "For how long?" "As long as it takes. Could be weeks. Could be longer." She paused, her expression softening just slightly. "Look, I understand why you did what you did. I'm a mother. If that was my child down there, I'd want someone to help. But I'm also responsible for this zoo, these animals, and the 90 other employees who work here. I can't have people making decisions based on emotion rather than protocol. So what happens now? Now you go home. Don't talk to the media. Don't post anything on social media. Don't discuss this with anyone outside your family. The investigation team will contact you to get your statement, and then we wait." Daniel stood up to leave, feeling numb. "Daniel," Hayes said as he reached the door. "Off the record? That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. I honestly can't decide which." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and left. The zoo had arranged for him to leave through a back entrance to avoid the media. But as he walked to his car, he could see news helicopters circling overhead. This was already bigger than he'd imagined. His phone had been in his locker during the incident. When he retrieved it, he found 63 missed calls and over 200 text messages. Friends, family, former co-workers, people he hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had seen the video. Because, of course, there was video. Multiple videos from multiple angles, all showing him jumping into the enclosure, running to the child, facing down Kofi, and climbing out with the boy in his arms. It was already viral. Millions of views in just an hour. Daniel sat in his car in the parking lot, scrolling through the comments on one of the videos. They were split pretty evenly. Half called him a hero, half called him reckless. Some blamed the zoo. Some blamed the parents. Everyone had an opinion. One comment made him stop scrolling. He risked his life for a child that wasn't his. That's what real heroism looks like. Another said he should be fired. He put that gorilla in danger. What if they'd had to shoot it? Daniel put his phone down. He couldn't read anymore. He started his car and drove home, trying to ignore the way his hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. At home, his wife ran out before he'd even turned off the engine. "Oh my God, Daniel. I saw it on the news. Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" She wrapped her arms around him, and that's when Daniel finally broke down. All the fear and adrenaline and stress came pouring out. He sobbed into her shoulder while she held him in their driveway, telling him it was okay, he was safe, everything would be okay. But Daniel wasn't sure if anything would ever be okay again. He'd saved a child's life, yes, but at what cost? His career was on the line. The zoo's reputation was damaged. And Kofi, his friend for 12 years, might face consequences too if people decided the gorillas were too dangerous. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kofi's face. Not angry or aggressive, just confused. "Why did you come into my space? Why was everything different today?" By morning, the story had made national news. The rope burned through Daniel's gloves as he slid down into the enclosure. His feet hit the concrete hard, sending a jolt of pain through his knees, but he barely noticed. He was already running toward the child, his boots pounding against the ground. Behind him, he could hear the doors fully opening now. The sound of metal sliding against metal seemed impossibly loud, mixing with the screams of the crowd. Every second felt stretched out, like time had decided to slow down just to torture him. The little boy was lying face down, one arm twisted at an odd angle beneath him. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. Please be alive, he thought as he dropped to his knees beside the child. He gently turned the boy over, careful of his neck. There was blood, a gash on his forehead, probably from hitting the concrete. But the child's chest was moving. Shallow breaths, but breaths nonetheless. Daniel's fingers found a pulse. "Weak but steady, he's alive!" Daniel shouted to the crowd, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him over the chaos. The mother's sobs intensified. "Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay." Daniel did a quick assessment the way he'd been trained in his emergency first aid courses. The head wound was bleeding but not gushing. The arm was definitely broken, bent at a wrong angle. Possible concussion. Definitely needed a hospital, but he was breathing and his heart was beating. That's what mattered right now. Then Daniel heard something that made his blood freeze. A low rumble, deep and resonant. It was a sound he'd heard 100 times before, usually from the safety of the keeper area. It was Kofi's territorial vocalization. The silverback had emerged from the indoor area and spotted him. Daniel slowly turned his head, still crouched over the unconscious boy. Kofi stood about 30 feet away, his massive frame silhouetted against the afternoon sun. The other gorillas were behind him, 3 females and 2 younger males. All of them had stopped and were staring at the scene before them. This was their space, their territory, and now there were 2 intruders. Every instinct Daniel had screamed at him to grab the boy and run, but he knew that would be the worst possible thing to do. Running triggers a chase response in animals. Running says you're prey, and Kofi could cover 30 feet in the blink of an eye. Daniel's mind raced through everything he knew about gorilla behavior. 12 years of experience had to count for something. He knew Kofi wasn't inherently aggressive. Gorillas rarely attacked without provocation. They were gentle giants mostly, but mostly wasn't the same as always. The crowd had gone eerily quiet. Hundreds of people stood frozen watching. Phones were still recording, but nobody was talking anymore. Even the mother had stopped screaming, though Daniel could hear her rapid, panicked breathing. Kofi took a step forward. Then another. His eyes never left Daniel. Daniel knew he had 2 choices. Well, really, he had no choice at all. He couldn't leave the boy. The child needed immediate medical attention, and moving him could make injuries worse, but staying here wasn't exactly safe either. Okay. Think. Daniel whispered to himself. What do you know about Kofi? He knew Kofi was intelligent. Gorillas had cognitive abilities comparable to young human children. They could recognize faces, remember individuals, understand cause and effect. Kofi had known Daniel for years. Every morning feeding, every enrichment session, every interaction had built a relationship. But would that matter now? Would Kofi recognize him in this context, in this situation where nothing was normal? Daniel made a decision that went against every survival instinct he had. Instead of avoiding eye contact, which is what you're supposed to do with gorillas, he looked directly at Kofi. Not aggressive, not challenging, but clear. He wanted Kofi to see his face, to recognize him. Hey, Kofi, Daniel said, his voice surprisingly steady despite his racing heart. It's me, buddy. You know me. Kofi stopped walking. His head tilted slightly to one side, a gesture Daniel had seen countless times during their interactions. It was Kofi's curious look, the expression he made when he was trying to figure something out. The other gorillas hadn't moved. They were watching their leader, waiting to see what he would do. That was good. If Kofi stayed calm, they would too. But if Kofi charged, the others might follow. Daniel carefully scooped the unconscious boy into his arms, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Sudden movements would be interpreted as threatening. He stood up gradually, the child's small body surprisingly heavy in his arms. Kofi grunted. It wasn't an aggressive sound, more like a question. What are you doing? Why are you in my space? I know this is weird, big guy, Daniel said softly. I know this isn't how things usually work. But I need to get this little one out of here, okay? He took a step backward toward the wall where he could see security had lowered an emergency ladder. One step, then another. His eyes never left Kofi's face. The silverback watched him but didn't advance. The crowd remained silent, holding their collective breath. But then one of the females made a sharp barking sound. It was Zuri, the oldest female in the troop. She moved forward, positioning herself beside Kofi. Her eyes were fixed on the child in Daniel's arms. Daniel's heart sank. This was the complication he'd been afraid of. Gorillas were protective of their young. The sight of Daniel carrying what might look like a baby gorilla, same size, same vulnerable position, could trigger maternal instincts. Not good ones. It's okay, Zuri, Daniel said, though his voice was shakier now. It's not a baby gorilla. It's a human child. You know the difference, but did she? In this context, with blood on the boy's face and Daniel holding him in a protective cradle, would Zuri's instincts recognize the difference? Kofi made a decision. He sat down. Right there, 30 feet from Daniel, the massive silverback simply sat down on the grass and watched. It was such an unexpected move that Daniel almost laughed from pure nervous relief. In gorilla behavior, sitting down was a de-escalation. It said, I'm not a threat. I'm not engaging in conflict, but Zuri hadn't sat down. She was still standing, still staring, still making that concerned barking sound. The two younger males had started moving to the sides, not aggressive but curious, trying to get a better view of what was happening. Daniel was surrounded. Not intentionally, not threateningly, but surrounded nonetheless, and he was still 15 feet from the ladder, the child's blood soaking into his uniform, his own legs shaking so hard he wasn't sure how much longer he could stand. "Security, I need that ladder closer," Daniel called out, his voice finally betraying his fear. "We're trying. The angle is wrong." Someone shouted back. Of course it was. Nothing about this situation was going according to plan. One of the younger males, Biko, suddenly charged forward. Not all the way to Daniel, but close enough. It was a display, a show of strength. Young male gorillas did this sometimes, testing boundaries, showing off. Normally it was harmless. Normally there wasn't a 3-year-old child between them. Kofi roared. The sound was deafening, echoing off the concrete walls of the enclosure. But it wasn't directed at Daniel. It was directed at Biko. The younger male immediately stopped, lowered his head in submission, and backed away. Daniel understood what had just happened. Kofi had just told the young male to stand down. The silverback was maintaining order, keeping his troop calm. It was a good sign. Maybe the best sign Daniel could hope for in this nightmare scenario. "Thank you, Kofi," Daniel whispered. He took another step backward. The ladder was closer now, maybe 10 feet away. Security had managed to adjust the angle, and it reached almost to the ground. But Daniel would need both hands to climb it, and he was holding a child. "Daniel, we'll catch him. Throw him up to us?" a security guard shouted. "Throw him?" The boy had a head injury, possibly a concussion, definitely a broken arm. Throwing him could cause more damage. But staying here was dangerous too. Daniel looked at the child's face. He was so young, probably hadn't even started preschool yet. He'd come to the zoo for a fun day out and ended up here. The boy's mother was probably a good parent who'd looked away for just 1 second, long enough for her curious son to slip through a gap in the barrier that shouldn't have existed. None of this was anyone's fault. Not really. Just a series of small failures in the system that had led to this moment. A barrier with a gap just slightly too large, a child just curious enough to explore. Timing that put them all in this impossible situation. But fault didn't matter right now. Getting this boy to safety mattered. Getting himself to safety mattered. Daniel made his decision. He moved quickly, knowing that hesitation would only make things worse. He positioned himself at the base of the ladder, adjusted the child in his arms so he was cradled against Daniel's chest, and started climbing one-handed. It was harder than he'd expected. The boy weighed maybe 35 pounds, all dead weight since he was unconscious. The ladder rungs bit into Daniel's hand. His other arm burned with the effort of holding the child secure. Below him, the gorillas watched. Kofi was still sitting, but Zuri had moved closer. She was directly beneath the ladder now, looking up with those incredibly human eyes. "Almost there," Daniel grunted, pulling himself up another rung. His foot slipped. For one heart-stopping moment, he thought he was going to fall backward, taking the child with him, but his hand gripped the rung tighter, his muscles screaming in protest, and he managed to catch himself. 3 more rungs. That's all he needed. Just 3 more. The crowd below was shouting encouragement now, a wall of sound that seemed to push him upward. 2 more rungs. 1 more. Hands reached down from above, multiple pairs of hands belonging to security guards and zoo staff. They grabbed the child first, lifting him gently but quickly over the barrier. Then they pulled Daniel up and over. His legs gave out the moment he was on solid ground. He collapsed onto the concrete pathway, gasping for breath, his entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear and relief. The morning started like any other Saturday at Riverside Zoo. Daniel had already been there since 6 in the morning, preparing food and checking on the animals before the crowds arrived. After 12 years of working with gorillas, he'd developed a routine that felt like second nature. Mix the vegetables, hide the treats, check the enclosures, and make sure everything was safe and secure. By noon, the zoo was packed. Families streamed through the gates, kids tugging their parents toward their favorite exhibits. The gorilla habitat was always the most popular spot on weekends. There was something magical about watching these massive creatures interact with each other, so similar to humans yet so different. Daniel stood inside the gorilla enclosure, something he'd done thousands of times before. The gorillas were temporarily inside their climate-controlled indoor area, separated by thick steel doors. This gave him time to set up enrichment activities for them. He scattered pieces of fruit in hidden spots, tucked vegetables into puzzle feeders, and made sure their water was fresh. The crowd pressed against the viewing glass, watching him work. "Mommy, look at the man in there," a little girl squealed, pointing at Daniel through the glass. "He takes care of the gorillas, sweetie," her mother explained. "He's making sure they have everything they need." Daniel waved at the crowd with a smile. He loved this part of his job, showing people that zoo work was about more than just feeding animals. It was about understanding them, respecting them, and creating environments where they could thrive. He'd spent years building relationships with each gorilla in the troop, learning their personalities and quirks. The star of the group was definitely Kofi, the silverback. At 400 pounds of pure muscle, he was an impressive sight. But what most people didn't know was how gentle he could be. Daniel had seen Kofi carefully cradle a baby gorilla, had watched him share food with the younger members of the troop, had observed his patient interactions with the females. Sure, Kofi could be dangerous. Any wild animal could. But after 12 years, Daniel understood him. The crowd continued to grow larger. It was one of those perfect spring days when everyone wanted to be outside. Phones were everywhere, recording videos and taking photos. Social media had changed everything about zoo visits. Now everyone wanted that perfect shot, that viral moment. Daniel checked his watch. 2 more minutes and he'd be done with setup. Then he'd exit through the keeper door, and the gorillas would be released back into their outdoor space. The timing had to be precise. Safety protocols existed for a reason, and Daniel had never violated them. Not once in 12 years. He was bending down to place the last puzzle feeder when he heard it. A sound that every parent recognizes instantly, that makes your heart stop. A child's scream, but not the playful kind. This was pure terror. Daniel spun around so fast he nearly dropped the feeder. His eyes scanned the crowd frantically, trying to locate the source of the scream. Then he saw her. A woman with her hands pressed against the glass, her face frozen in absolute horror. She wasn't looking at Daniel. She was looking down into the moat. The moat was a 15-foot drop designed to keep the gorillas in their space. It was lined with concrete at the bottom, hard and unforgiving. And there, crumpled in a small heap at the bottom, was a little boy. For a second, Daniel's brain refused to process what he was seeing. How did a child get in here? There were barriers, railings, safety measures. But somehow, impossibly, a 3-year-old boy had slipped through and fallen into the gorilla enclosure. The crowd erupted into chaos. People were screaming, shouting, some running toward the emergency call button scattered around the zoo. The mother's screams rose above everything else, a sound of pure anguish that Daniel would hear in his nightmares for years to come. Daniel's training kicked in immediately. He knew the protocol by heart. Never enter an enclosure with potentially dangerous animals. Call for backup. Initiate emergency procedures. Wait for the specialized team. These rules had been drilled into him during countless safety meetings, but the child wasn't moving. Daniel's mind raced through the numbers. Security was stationed at the main entrance, at least 3 minutes away at a full sprint. The emergency response team would need to be radioed, gather their equipment, and make their way here. 5 minutes, maybe more. The tranquilizer guns were locked in the security office. Even if they got here fast, sedating a 400-pound gorilla wasn't instant. It took time for the drugs to work, and then Daniel heard it. The mechanical whir of the doors beginning to open, the automatic timer, set to release the gorillas back into their outdoor space. He had maybe 90 seconds before Kofi and the entire troop came outside.